Coleman will say a couple words, and then we'll get rolling.
Good morning. Happy Saturday in August. You are looking good. Feeling good. It's going to be a good day. So just wanted to say thanks for coming out on behalf of Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. This is an exciting project for us. And you've heard from me before, as Jason and Barry first came to me with the idea, to me, this idea is about innovation, education, and growth of our ag mission. So hats off to you for being here. I do think that this is an example of, we're at a pivotal point in our show. We've had lots of conversations internally about, are we a 20-day show or a year-round experience? And for us, HCAP gives us an opportunity to work outside our 20 days and to expand our mission of agriculture. So we're extremely excited about that. And I don't think you have to hear from me how important beef cattle is to me in my world. Those of you that were here last time heard Dad speak. It's definitely in my blood, and it's what we do. And to tie it all together for you, I just thought this was pretty interesting. Yesterday, we had 10 Bulgarians here visiting the rodeo on a part of a grant where they can go back and start a beef cattle operation back in a country of 1.8 million because they feel like that's the best and most beneficial protein source that they can have in their country. And I thought that said a lot as we look at where we are here and people talk about our industry and some of the things that we hear from folks that don't appreciate what we have. To me, it says a lot that other countries look for us and come to Texas to learn about our leadership. And that's what you're doing here today, our leadership about the beef cattle industry and how to make it work. So with that being said, thanks for being here. I know we're on a tight frame because we got lots of places to be. The Bulgarians were in Gonzales the day before. They said it was a little warm, is what they told me. So it may be kind of warm out there, but I know it'll be a great experience. So Jason and Barry and all the HCAP team, thanks for all you do and make it a great day.
Our Bulgarian field trip's going to be next year. I'm afraid the first seat cost may go up a little bit, but just
After looking at the first pictures of cattle they have, we may give them a couple of years.
Anyway, some glasses were left up on the table outside. These are probably a lady's.
I think they're mine.
Okay. Come on down. All right, we're going to get started. When we were putting this together last year, we wanted to do genetics, nutrition, and animal health. And when we were putting it together, there's one man that I've worked with this man for 20 some odd years. He's probably, he's one of the most intelligent men I've ever met in my life. And we've worked on cattle, we've worked on horses, we've worked on deer. When I had my feed store, he's outside the box thinking came from this man. I mean, he just doesn't do things just because Purina said to do it or Cargill said to do it. He does it because it's the right thing to do. I've seen our animal perform just at high level on his feed line. I've got a mare that was a foal when he first developed his feed. That was the first foal from conception through foaling ever on total equine. And I still ride this mare. I rope off this mare. She's 15 now, and she's hair, coat, feet, temperament, everything. I attribute to the feed and the formulations he does. Anyway, Superman. I've told him not to get into the weeds too much with him talking. He can get way out there, but we're going to focus on nutrition. We're going to focus on minerals and how they all tie together to help get cows bred and then raise a healthy calf. So anyway, this is Dr. Anderson.
Can you hear me? Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jason. Thank you all for coming. when Jason called me and told me what you guys were doing here, I got kind of enthused, and then he asked me if I'd come and talk, and I thought, oh my, do I dare talk to those people? You see, I got my degree from SDSU back in the dark ages before some of you were probably even born, and I know I'm right in the middle of Aggieville, so please bear with me. But what Jason said is kind of right. I've prided myself all these years of not following. I don't pay much attention to what people are doing. I focus on what I think is right, and I probably disagree with things once in a while. And if so, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. But just to give you a very brief history, I spent 3 years in Wyoming getting my real education. I was an extension livestock specialist in Wyoming where I worked with every species. And that was the greatest experience I've ever had. Then I spent 15 years with a major feed company. Like he said, I was both a feedlot consultant and a district manager at different times. And so I got some sales experience, learned how to deal with people that disagreed with me or distrusted me, and that was a very important part of my education. Then I spent 45 years as a consulting, now if you add these up, I'm not 100 years old. Not quite, but getting close. But just some of these overlap. And then the last 18 years is when, like Jason said, I decided when I went out on my own, I was a private consultant for several years, and then somebody asked me one day to formulate a supplement for horses, or the whole equine world, just one formula. He said, can you do that? How probable do you think that was in my mind when he asked me that? If you go to the feed store and look around. I said yes, of course. And I did that. It's the same formula today. I haven't changed one bit. It's been working for me all these years, and there is one formula. Therefore, I have one formula basically for every species I work with, whether beef cattle, goats, sheep, dogs, deer, birds, it doesn't matter. The reason being is that inside our body, there are cells. Inside the rumen of a cow, there are bacteria. Inside of a lagoon, where we have waste, there are bacteria. Single-cell organisms. Basically, we all have the same requirement, whether it's a cell in my body, a dog, or baby calf, or it doesn't matter. All I had to do was figure out a way to get the right nutrients to all those cells and bacteria and whatever. And so there's one, and when I get done describing this today, what you're going to see is my basic package that I use, or my concept. And what is important? First of all, I'm going to kind of run through these fairly quick because I've got a limited amount of time. And one of my reactions to Jason was, you've asked me to do in 50 minutes what normally I would do in 8 hours. So we don't have 8 hours, so we're going to boil this down real quick. My job is to keep animals healthy as a nutritionist. That's my first focus. If I can't keep them healthy, they're not going to do anything else. Yeah, veterinary world is very, very necessary, but we can help that world. We can help keep them from having to be treated by doing prevention, and that's been my whole focus all these years. Even when I was at the feed yard, I had some very serious discussions with veterinarians because I kind of tried to keep the animals from having to use them, and, well, they didn't like that. Make everything the most efficient possible, and efficiency is something you're going to hear me talk about all the time today. And if you come to any of my talks ever, or hear me talk to somebody, efficiency is the number one thing I talk about. What is the number one thing that you as cattle people have to rely on to make money? Anybody can make a lot of gain, right? But can you make it efficiently? Then if you can make all that gain, then you work on how do you make it less costly and more efficient, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And then we try to maximize performance and production when we formulate anything. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. Critical terms. You're going to hear me talk about digestibility, which simply means, I'm sure most of you understand that, but digestibility is simply, if I put a unit of something in the animal, in the stomach, how much percentage of that goes in the animal and what percentage of that goes out the back end. So the digestibility is that stays in the animal. If a digestibility of a certain hay is 50%, you get half of it staying in there and half of it going out the back end, and that's pretty typical of a lot of our fibers, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can change that, and that is the key thing we're going to talk about here, is how do we change the efficiency of fiber digestibility. Bioavailability is, I'm going to talk about that when I talk about minerals. Bioavailability means about the same thing with a mineral. How much of that mineral, when it goes in the digestive tract, actually ends up at the cell level and doing the job that it was sent in there to do. And we're going to talk about the importance. Chelate versus complex. Not only are trace minerals important, but the form is extremely important. More important than the level, actually, is the form that you put in that animal, and that's what we're going to talk about, and that's one of the keys to my whole success. Then Ascophyllum nodosum, that's a term you don't have to remember, or a lot of people want to learn how to say that because it sounds very scientific. It actually is. It's a scientific name for a special seaweed species that we use because it has some very special properties, and that's one of the things I've relied on for about 25 years. Now, life cycle nutrition. I'm going to talk just briefly about the different parts of the life cycle. When we talk about life cycle, I break them into about 6 different groups. The first one is the in utero, the fetus, and gestation of the cow. Now, we oftentimes talk about gestation feeding, when we feed them. We need to feed them this much energy and protein all along through, and then at a certain stage, the last 3 months or last trimester, we have to increase it by this much, and that's fine. But why are we doing that? We're doing that for the fetus, not for the cow. If we have the cow in a kind of a static condition, and by the way, we don't have to have fat cows to be in good condition. That's something I've learned over the years, that I've had situations where we've had some cows in rather poor condition in certain times of the year, and we can still get them bred, and I'm going to tell you why a little later. But in utero, we have to think about that baby calf because every day he's in there, he's developing an immune system, he's developing a bone structure, and those are the 2 key things that we want to develop in that baby calf. And if we can get those 2 things done, we're going to have a better calf hit the ground. And I'm not going to talk about the requirements because this is the requirements you can find in anything. And this is my little book that I wrote in 1994. Just outlines all the requirements for a cow and calf and feedlot and all that, and you can use that. It'd take me about an hour just to go through just the basics of those. So you need to think about that and remember that you're feeding a baby inside that uterus, and there are 2 things that are very, very critical to do to get that fetus to develop properly. And we're learning this in horses where they're doing some x-ray work. Of course, some of the cutting horse people and so on, they x-ray and they do things that, that I never thought we would do with animals, but they actually are studying in some places the growth rate of the fetus in the uterus. And they're finding that if they'll use what I'm going to talk about here today, that the bone growth and structure develops much faster than what they're used to seeing. Golly, why is that? 2 things. One is we're pumping more blood into that uterus, because one of the things we talk about, that Ascophyllum nodosum, one of the things that does, it really increases vasodilation. There's another term. I'm sure most of you understand what that is. Vasodilation. It means an expanding of the blood vessels, giving them more volume. It's like getting a bigger hose. You can get more water through it. And by doing that, we can get a better transfer of nutrients across that placental wall. And if we can get more nutrients across there, now our thing is, now we have to have the correct nutrients to catalyze or create all of those those reactions that are going to take place. How do we create faster chemical reactions in the body? We have more of the critical trace minerals. Trace minerals, which I'll show you shortly, trace minerals are the catalyst or the starter of all reactions in that body. It doesn't matter what reaction you're talking about. It has to have one or more trace minerals to start it. Then it has to have the correct kind of trace mineral, because they're not all alike. All trace minerals are not alike, trust me. Then the next one is lactation and breeding. I mentioned that we don't have to have a fat cow or even a cow in really good condition to create a pregnant animal. They can cycle and they can settle in rather poor body condition. I've seen cows in body conditions 3, get bred and carry a calf. As long as you give them some of the key critical things I'm talking about. Now, yes, you should not have a body condition score 3 cow, but it happens. Some of you are going to experience that this year probably because of just the weather, the availability of feed and things like that. And I'm not going to start on that because that's a serious problem we're going to deal with this winter. We've already started to see it in our feed prices. But if you will feed them the critical micro and what you might call minor nutrients, we can get those cows to reproduce and carry on just like they were in great condition. So, and that goes along with breeding or lactation. And just remember, a cow has to have probably about 20% more energy and protein when she's lactating, if she's a good cow, than when she's dry. Weaning. Weaning has been kind of my forte for years and years. When I was a district manager for a major feed company, one of the things we did a lot of work with ranchers on weaning calves, and I carried that over into the feed yard. And weaning and starting are pretty much the same thing. You're dealing with a calf that's compromised immune-wise. You're dealing with a calf that's full of anxiety. You're dealing with a calf that is not going to eat because of the adrenaline that they're dealing with. And there's a lot of those negative things, psychological and physical, that you deal with weaning. And here's where 2 things. We need to try to help that calf with anxiety. And there are different ways you can do that. You've probably seen all those different ways of weaning where you keep the calf across the fence from the cow in different ways. Different people have different ways of trying to reduce that anxiety. Probably more for the cow than the calf, but anyway. But we can actually reduce the anxiety nutritionally. Yeah, we do it all the time. We reduce the anxiety nutritionally by, again, using that ascophyme nodosum. That ascophyme nodosum feeds the nervous system of an animal to the point where it functions very, very calmly and normally and takes that excitement, that high and low, out of the reaction to a normal stimulation. What animals, whether they're a horse or a goat or a cow or a calf, it doesn't matter, when they get cranky, when they do things in a startling way, what they're doing is they're overreacting to a standard stimulation. And if you have the things that help that nervous system run correctly without the highs and lows, all of a sudden they don't overreact to those situations. We've learned that in horses for many years, but we're also learning it in show calves, show goats, and things like that, where they put them on the prescribed program I'm talking about here, and all of a sudden they're very, very easy. They're very calm in the show ring. Barrel horses will go in the arena when they wouldn't before. Rope horses sit in the box when they didn't want to before, and all these things. And it's no magic. Sometimes they think it's almost magical what I've done, but it's not. It's simply good nutrition. There again, weaning is very important, and I'm not going to go through the diets because there's dozens of diets you can use, but you remember one thing that I have always used is very high protein, higher than, I'm a guy that has always used higher protein than most nutritionists will. You never waste protein. Even if you have excess protein and they don't need it, They use it for energy. So you're not going to waste it. So feeding a little higher protein is a good thing. And then it's the trace minerals and the mineral program on a weaning and so I can keep that immune system, because that's the big bugaboo. Backgrounding is not much different. Backgrounding is fairly straightforward. If you want to have an animal grow fast and efficiently, you have to have all those reactions taking place, right? Now, you can background on grass, you can background on a TMR in a feed yard or whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. Here again, you have to have the critical points where that animal can use whatever you're putting in that feed bunk or out on that grass. They have to be able to use it more efficiently to get more out of it. And that's what we do. I've got stories, many stories about cattle. Actually, bucking bulls is where we started this. I started working with the bucking bull people because they needed some help in making their bulls jump higher and stronger, like the horses that we were working with. So we did. And sure enough, one of the first things they said was, when they started on the program I prescribed, all of a sudden the bulls dropped their hay intake by a third. They said, "What's going on? What's wrong? What's going on? There's something wrong." They'd call me in about a week. I said, "Well, how's the bull look?" "Good." "How are they acting?" "Wonderful." "So what's your problem?" And literally we did. We dropped the hay intake by a third, and the bulls were getting stronger and better, healthier, looked better on a third less hay. And at the same time, they were eating 2/3 less grain product than they were before. So there's something going on here in the rumen, not just in the animal itself. Let's talk about, this is where we do all our work, the rumen and animal. Of course, I also, you have to key in on the large intestine and the colon, but the rumen is where we do the work here, and so that's where I focused on. Now, if you talk about a lot of people, they'll say, you really don't have to put B vitamins and stuff in that rumen because they manufacture those with the bacteria and they absorb it. Sure they do. Do you know how the absorption rate of B vitamins in the rumen of an animal is? Not very good. Yeah, they'll get enough to kind of get by. But the bacteria are producing them. Let's turn that backwards. If the bacteria grow better with B vitamins, like the cells in our body do, why can't we increase the growth rate of those bacteria by including all those things in the program? Folks, it works. I'm here to tell you that's what's going on in the rumen when these bull guys tell me that, is we are feeding the bacteria so well that they're growing much faster. The other thing is, in that rumen, we have good guys and bad guys. There are bacteria in there that are very positive and they love to digest fiber and they're very efficient at it. And then we have bacteria that are not good at that. What I call the gram-negative bacteria, which are the ones that drop the pH. When you hear about acidosis and stuff, that's what's happening. The bad guys are taking over and they're dropping the pH, and the whole digestive system in there starts to slow down. Not only do you get acidotic cattle, but you also slow down the fermentation of whatever's going on in there, so it's less efficient. Going back to the ascoflaminidosum, we're going to show you very quickly later that it controls those bad guys. It controls E. coli, salmonella, all those kinds of things. And if we subdue those, the pH goes up. We have a whole different group of bacteria. They eat fiber more efficiently, and voila, we have a more efficient animal. By maybe 20, 30, 40%, if you calculate that out, what's going on in that rumen. Now, my compadres aren't buying this, but my customers are. They think it's okay, but that's okay with me. As opposed to the, just quickly to show you that this poor old horse, he's got a backward digestive system. You have to go through the small intestine first and then get to the hindgut to ferment. So there we have a whole different set of rules. And that's another session. I'm not going to go into that today. But the same thing happens back here. We're still dealing with the same thing. It's just that they don't have the ability to absorb the end product nutrients that the ruminant has, because they make these nutrients, then it goes into the small intestine where it's absorbed very efficiently. So it's kind of nature has played a trick, but the horse still does real well on that. Now let's talk about how to unlock it. Promote bacterial growth. Okay, I've already talked about that. I tend to get ahead of myself. We're providing the nutrients for bacteria so the bacteria grow faster. And like I say, they have only one thing to eat in there, supposedly, and that's fiber. So if we can make them grow faster, that's the only way they can do it, is eating fiber faster and more efficiently. Now, we control the gram-negative bacteria, like I said, and that's probably one of the keys. Because see, that's what Rumensin has done all these years. Rumensin is a coccidiostat. All it does is it controls certain bacteria. And they learn with Movitec or Rumensin or some of these coccidiostats that they started out in chickens. They said, okay, if it controls those bad guys, then if we put it in the rumen, it control the bad guys in there, and it'll be more efficient. Sure enough, it was. That's a chemical. I don't use chemicals anymore. I don't dare, because when we make feed, we have horses and cattle feed being made in the same plant, so there cannot be anything anywhere near any horse feed, because I'm not going to go through killing any horses with Rumensin. Okay, fiber digestion done by bacteria converts the sugars in fiber. Now, see, fiber is made up of sugar units. All fiber is. It's little pieces of glucose or glucans or whatever, different sugars all hooked together in a matrix, and they form then the fiber that we know of when you go out and grab a straw or a plant and break it open and it's a hard fiber. That's sugar. So what our job is to unlock those sugar units so we can make them into volatile fatty acids, and bacteria are the only way we can do that. There's no other way. Then we take the volatile fatty acids, which are acetic, propionic, and butyric, and valeric. There's 4 major volatile fatty acids, and these are simply short carbon unit pieces that it turns the sugar into. They're absorbed by through the rumen wall fairly efficiently, and it goes into the bloodstream. Now, they're made into fat, they're made into more sugar, they're made go into the energy cycle, and they supply the carbon units for all those reactions that are going to take place in the body. That's the magic of this ruminant animal. They amaze me. I've studied them for many, many years, and they still amaze me how they do that. But, okay, what are the missing keys? Here, and I've touched on this already, protein and amino acid digestion. Everything in our body has to have the building blocks of amino acids to do whatever it does, whether it's hormones, whether it's muscle, whatever it is, it has to have the building blocks of amino acids. Now, the more efficient you can make that amino acid digestion and absorption, the more efficient it's going to be. Going back to Asclepius nodosa, documented in science, makes the digestion rate of several amino acids: histidine, lysine, leucine, phenylalanine, valine, which are critical amino acids that the animal has to take in the body every day. It makes them about 8% more efficient at digestion and absorption. That's just the way nature is. Minerals, the overlooked nutrients. I'm a mineral fanatic. And you've probably gathered that already, that I'm a fanatic on minerals, especially trace minerals. And the level and form of trace minerals, and then the Asclepius nodosa. Let's talk a little bit about digestive health. The effects of absorption. If you have a healthy gut, a hindgut, you and I, a dog, cow, it doesn't matter. If you have a healthy hindgut, and that's what we provide with these nutrients, this program, they absorb nutrients more efficiently because they have less damage and competition from those bad bacteria. That's one of the things it is. And by the way, if you feed this program, you'll have less internal parasites. That's not a claim. That's what customers are telling me all the time. Internal parasite load goes down, even in goats. If you can believe that or not, but goat people even tell me that. Sheep, cattle. It affects the function of the immune system. If you have a healthy hindgut, your immune system is healthy and strong. If you don't have a strong immune system, I mean, a healthy hindgut, you're going to have more health problems. And that's how we do it with these weaned calves and stuff. If you'll follow this program of getting these critical nutrients, and I don't care how you get them in there, you get these critical nutrients in there at the right level, and you're going to have very, very little health problems when you wean those calves. Okay? We've watched it and it works. Hormonal control is highly micronutrient dependent. The hormones in the body, and there are hundreds of them, I mean, right down to the eicosanoids that are at the cell level. Did you know that there are hormones right at the cell level, never go anywhere but right outside the cell? They're produced by the cell, they help nutrients be absorbed. They're called eicosanoids, and they're very, very critical to our health and well-being. They're all protein. They're all manufactured by a chemical reaction, and that chemical reaction to make that protein is requiring a trace mineral. So here we go, back to trace minerals. Fertility, blood flow to endocrine system. The whole endocrine system of the body, especially the sex hormones, are produced by specific hormone-producing systems. If you can increase the blood flow through those systems, you will increase the ability to put out more of those hormones and keep them in balance. We have story after story after story. Infertile stud horses. Older horses, going on my program, going back into service. I've got a bunch of. In fact, a lot of you probably have heard the name Dual Ray. Old Dual Ray was 24 years old, went sterile, took him home and put him on my program. And before he had his accident and had to be put down, he was already starting to produce semen again. It was a real tragic deal. Got a stud horse up in Colorado, that paint horse stud that was 19 years old, totally sterile, going downhill. Put him on my program. Today, his semen at 22 years old, and she'll tell you this, you can call Joni Lotion, is better today than he was when he was 6 years old. Just because he got the right building blocks. That's all he was missing. Nothing special, nothing unique. But the trace minerals are important, protein availability, and amino acid digestibility. Now, I want you to just, don't try to memorize this all at once. All I want to show you is the interaction and competition between minerals. You know, when we start throwing minerals into a formula, we have to be careful because some of them are antagonizing others. Like, I like to use copper. Look at copper is associated with 6 different ones: cadmium, iron, phosphorus, sulfur, zinc, molybdenum. They can all either block each other or enhance each other. And if you look at this long enough, you'll see how many relationships there are that we have to be careful of. And potassium and sodium are directly related, but one of the things that isn't drawn correctly on here is potassium to calcium and magnesium. And I'm going to show you that. But the major minerals are calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, chlorine, and phosphorus. In any program you buy, if you go to the feed store and buy something, make sure that the chlorine is not going to be on the label. Okay, that goes with sodium chloride, salt. But and sodium is you're going to find salt on there. So sodium and chlorine aren't going to show up like that. But you need to have calcium and magnesium in anything. Anything you buy, any mineral, any cake, I don't care what it is. Any liquid supplement, because I've used them all, I've worked with all of them, they're all fine. And phosphorus is one of the keys, the driving forces most of the time. Phosphorus is probably the most driving force of animals eating mineral that I've ever seen in my life. If you're feeding a good mineral, like a 12-12, not just talking about a general formulation, like any 12-12 mineral that they eat when they need it, I can tell you when your cows are going to be 60 days from calving. Mineral intake is going to go along like this during gestation, and all of a sudden it's going to go just like this, it's going to double. The cow is 60 days from calving. And I learned this way back in the dark ages when I was district manager working with cow-calf people. People would call me and say, what's going on? These cows are going to eat me out of the house and hold my mineral. So I started calculating. I said, well, when are you calving? And the tighter the calving time, the more accentuated this is because so many of them go at once. And every time it would be about 60 days from the average calving date. And so I got so where I could, say, I can tell you when your cows are going to calve. Some of them want it, some of them do. But that's one to work with. Now, just a rough, quick, if you're looking at kind of the, how they should be related in the total diet, and this is not just in the mineral you take home and feed, but in the total diet, you should have about 1¼ times as much potassium as calcium. You never want potassium less than calcium. That needs to be above that. The phosphorus needs to be about 3/10, maybe 4/10 of the calcium, and magnesium about 0.3 versus calcium the 1. Now, I'm not talking about just levels, I'm talking about their relativity. What are some of the problems we can run into if we get this out of whack? Anybody ever have grass tetany? Grass tetany is when potassium is way too high and the calcium and magnesium source is too low, and it causes muscle rigidity. Muscles fire and they can't let go. And that's grass tetany. And here's a rule of thumb. If you ever have this, look at this. If the potassium level is more than twice as much as the calcium plus magnesium combined, picture this, an equation. Potassium on the top, calcium, magnesium below. If the combined two below are less than half of the potassium level, you're going to end up with some possible muscle contractions. And we see this in horses too. People don't think about that way, but we do find that in horses where they're feeding extremely high levels of alfalfa and because some of this alfalfa has extremely high potassium levels, and they don't have enough calcium in their program, and they can have that problem. Where did I go here? Okay. Oh no, here we go. Trace minerals. Now we're getting to my real critical point. Cobalt, copper, selenium, iron, manganese, iodine, and zinc. Those are critical. You have to have those in the program. You can have problems with too much or too little, any of these. You can have problems, especially selenium, mulberry heart disease in calves, white muscle disease in lambs, things like that. Selenium deficiency is one of the real tragic ones to see because it causes so many serious problems. Baby lambs born and they can't move their hind legs, and they just die because they can't move their muscles. Calves just die, boom, because all of a sudden selenium deficiency causes mulberry heart, they call it, and it allows the certain muscles in the heart suddenly just quit working. And they're dead. Nothing you can do about it, can't see it coming, can't stop it. All you can do is prevent it. We have selenium deficient areas in the country. Selenium can be toxic. I don't know if there are any selenium toxic areas in the area that we're talking about here. I don't think so. Mostly there in the North Country, in Wyoming and South Dakota. If you have too much selenium, you watch the ears and tails and hooves fall off your cows, calves, and horses. The hooves will literally disintegrate off the horse. They turn chalky, and that's a selenium toxicity. So that's one we have to kind of watch the balance, and that's the only one regulated by law. I, as a nutritionist, am forbidden by law to formulate more than 0.3 parts per million selenium into any total diet. It's fine, ways to get around that. If you need more, there's ways to do it. Iron is more of a overdose than it is a deficiency. Too much iron and too much molybdenum, which I don't list on here because it's such a minor one. If you have too high iron and molybdenum, you will flat tie up your copper. You ever go drive down the road and you see these black cows, and they kind of have that brown tinge to them, in the summertime especially? They look like, they say, well, maybe there might be a little sunburn or something like that. Probably not. They're probably copper deficient. And that rancher might be feeding plenty of copper. But if there's a high level of iron, more than 400 parts per million iron and more than 3 parts per million molybdenum in the diet, it'll basically tie up all your copper. And you have a copper deficiency, and copper is probably the key one that they work with. And then, of course, zinc and copper, and they're involved in every reaction in the body. Let's talk just briefly about the kind. I said the quantity is critical, but the kind is more important. We have several kinds. Metallic. Metallic is, like, let's use zinc as an example. Zinc oxide. Zinc and oxygen tied together. It's called a metallic ion. And it has a low bioavailability, probably about 15%. So if you put 100 units of zinc oxide in a diet, you're going to get about 15 parts per million, in the animal. If you use enough of it, you can get the zinc you need in there, but it takes an awful lot of it at that bioavailable. Then we came up with the sulfates probably, I don't know how many years ago, probably before my time in the feed industry, they came along with the sulfates, which is a sulfur, SO2, sulfur and oxygen molecule tied to the metal, whether it's a zinc or a copper, it doesn't matter. And this is more expensive, but we increase the bioavailability or the ability of the body to tear that apart and use the trace mineral. That's what it's all about. Absorb it and use it. And so this increased quite dramatically. Still not good enough for me. Then along in the 70s, along came the amino acid complex. And this was a much better deal. We were running about 80% bioavailable, maybe 90 at times in some of this, depending on the situation. But this was where they were taking this mineral, this is the mineral, and hooking it onto an amino acid. And the amino acids they were using were methionine and lysine, and they're very, very big amino acids. As you can see, they're very complex, quite complex. But it was working fine. And then they came along with the proteins, which were just a metal attached to a whole protein molecule. Well, this didn't make much sense to me because a protein molecule is not near as easy to absorb as an amino acid. So this is still out there, but not very well used. This is the one I use. I'll tell you why. You see how big this is? See how many of these little things there are compared to those others? This is the smallest amino acid there is. This is lysine. Lysine is extremely simple and extremely small and extremely bioavailable. Not only that, the metal ones and the sulfate ones are absorbed very early in the small intestine. Along with the amino acid complexes and the proteinases, they are absorbed in the small intestine very early on. And later down the tract is where this one is absorbed. So, and not only can you get it in there farther down the tract, but you can get more total of your element in there with this one than you can any other form. And that's why I think one of the really big reasons why my programs do what I'm talking about here. So that is very, very important that you look at amino acid chelates. And when you go to buy something in the feed store, look at that label. Don't look at the guarantees, look at the ingredient list. And it has to say amino acid chelate. Look for that name. Now, let's talk about that Ascophyllum nodosum, kelp meal. It's a North Atlantic cold water species. It grows up by Nova Scotia, Norway, Ireland, way up in that area. It contains a high level of sulfated short-chain polysaccharide called fucoid. Now, if you want something interesting, write that name down and go Google it. Fucoid. And you'll find some very interesting things about fucoid, including immune system enhancement. Actually, there's some work out there that talks about it assisting with cancer and some of the Japanese work. But it is a very interesting thing, and has been kind of the backbone and the go-to product in my formulas for 25 years, because I've followed and watched and worked with a lot of this research that was done. It was done at Texas, or Virginia Tech and Texas Tech. They did this cooperatively because it started out in Virginia Tech, actually, for heat tolerance and fescue toxicosis, which you don't have here, thank heavens. You don't want it here. But that alleviates that. Texas Tech, I know that's that little school up in the Panhandle. And then the University of Missouri, where they actually documented in heat chambers, where they took animals and they put them in a chamber and they could raise the body temperature very slowly and get it just where they wanted it. And they discovered that if they fed the Tasco or the Ascofan nodosum to when the body temperature would not rise as much. It would stay about 1 degree cooler. And 1 or 1.5 degree rise on these animals is pretty significant. They're pretty significant at all. So that's where some of that data came from. Alabama, body temperature, and also they found that in the summertime, black-hided cows, where they were doing the work, the ones that were on the seaweed were staying out in the sun grazing when the others were in the pond. And then they got to noticing there's something about the flies on these cows, so they started counting the flies. That nice job, sit out there and count flies inside the cow. But I guess it pays. But they found out that the incidence or the density of flies on these cows was about 50% as much as on the control cows. They thought it was something internally. I believe it's something externally. Because when we have this in the program, you can go around any stable and they don't have flies. You can go around cattle that are on it, they don't have, where do flies larvae develop? The manure. And if you don't have any starch in the manure, what do they eat? They have to eat fiber and they don't grow very fast. So all of a sudden we have less flies. See, sometimes you can kind of deduce these things if you just follow through and think it through. But I think that's what's happening. And then the E. coli reduction, they did a lamb study up in Lethbridge, Alberta, and found that if they fed this early in the feeding period at fairly high levels for 2 to 3 weeks, that all of a sudden the E. coli shedding started to go down. They followed the E. coli shedding. And by the time the treated lambs went to slaughter, they were basically zero shedding of E. coli. It not only started right away, but it kept on doing it even after they quit feeding it. And it stops the E. coli. And E. coli causes us way more problems than we ever realize. It's just that they're small, they're insidious, and we kind of live with them because they don't kill the animal. And so we just get by without it. Okay, heat tolerance. I mentioned that. Digestive tract. Oh, North Dakota State University did a trial and found that it increases fiber digestibility quite dramatically. That's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing in the animals that we put it in. Maintain better lower gut environment. The immune system is stronger. The blood flow increases. This is all stuff that they've documented or people have observed. Last slide. I just want to show you something. I want to ask you a question. How many of you ever seen a bull dabble? Anybody? We've got a group of bulls up in Butler, Missouri that we've had on our program now for 2 years. Now, this bull hasn't been on there for 2 years. He's been on it for 6 months, but this is a young bull. About 16 months old, weighs about 1,600 pounds. Going into a sale this fall. They've been using my program on fescue. They do everything on grass. They don't confine them. They don't feed them with a bunk. They just supplement them on grass, and that's their claim that they grass-fed development bulls. I've never seen that. I've been around a while. And so, if you have an animal super healthy and they have everything they need, everything is working right, this is the effect you can get on a lot of animals. You've seen horses dabble. Horses don't dabble unless they're healthy and unless they're feeding right. Because I have a lot of people that tell me, I've never seen dabbles in a horse, in this horse. All of a sudden they're dabbled up. Why? What's going on? I said, they're just healthy. That's pure and simple all it is. Very helpful. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I appreciate your time, and I'll turn it back to the boss.
Well, I was told that he went down in the weeds, came back up out of the weeds, went back down in the weeds. So anyway, we got a little presentation here for you, Dr. Andrew.
Oh, thank you.
Come on in. Come on in. As our first year of doing this, you're an integral part of what we're trying to get done. Just bringing information to people to help them make better decisions. So just give Dr. Anderson a round of applause, please.
I gotta remember my partner too. This is the other half of the company. By the way, our whole company consists of myself, Margaret, and my two sons. And that's the only people in our company. We have no other employees.
Yeah, no, I sent my resume to you.
Really? I forgot that.
Anyway, that concludes the speaking series. He's going to be available for those who are not going on the field trip for questions or whatever. If you're not going on the field trip, would you please put your name tag just on the table outside the door on the right. Buses are here. You get yourself something to drink, use the restroom, and they're just right straight out the escalator down. They're on the west side of the building. So anyway, thank y'all.